The thunder rolled across the Colorado plains as Tessa Wilkins urged her horse faster toward Cherry Creek. The letter crumpled in her pocket held terrible news. The Wilson Ranch, her childhood home where her brother still worked, had fallen on desperate times. After 5 years away in Denver, building a life as a schoolteacher, she was returning to a place that both haunted and called to her. April 1878 had brought relentless spring storms to the frontier, turning the dirt roads into treacherous mud paths. Tessa's auburn hair was plastered to her face, her traveling dress soaked through as she finally spotted the weathered arch marking the Wilson property. The main house stood in the distance, but something drew her toward the old barn first, a feeling, an instinct she couldn't explain. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, she heard it, before she saw it, the sound of a man weeping. The barn was dimly lit by a single lantern swinging from a post, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. There, in the center of the barn, was a man on his knees, shoulders slumped in defeat, his cowboy hat discarded beside him. She recognized him instantly, Xavier Zane, the ranch's foreman and her brother's closest friend. A man who had once been the strongest person she knew, now broken before her eyes. "Xavier," she called softly, stepping further into the barn, his head snapped up, eyes widening in disbelief. "Tessa." "What are you?" He quickly wiped his face with his sleeve, embarrassment coloring his features as he scrambled to his feet. "You shouldn't be here. My brother wrote to me." She moved closer, noticing how the years had hardened his once youthful face. His dark hair was longer now, streaked with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once made her heart race as a young woman, were rimmed with exhaustion. "Then you know." His voice was hollow. "I've lost everything, Tessa. The drought last summer, the cattle disease this winter, then the bank calling in the loan. I couldn't save it. Your brother left last week for California. The bank takes ownership tomorrow." Tessa stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Not me," she said firmly. "You haven't lost me." The words hung between them, charged with 5 years of distance and unspoken feelings. Xavier's eyes met hers, confusion and something deeper flickering across his face. "I don't understand," he said, his voice rough. "You left. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with this place or me." Tessa took a deep breath. "I left because I was young and foolish. I thought there was more out there for me than a ranch in Cherry Creek, but I was wrong, Xavier. When I got Thomas's letter, I realized what I really left behind." The rain pounded on the roof above them, creating a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the barn in harsh white light before plunging them back into shadow. "It's too late," Xavier said, shaking his head. "By this time tomorrow, this land belongs to the bank. I've got nothing to offer you or anyone else." "Then we'll start over," Tessa said with a determination that surprised even herself. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. "I've saved every penny from teaching these past 5 years. It's not much, but it's something." Xavier stared at her, disbelief written across his features. "Why would you do that, after everything that happened between us?" The memory of their last encounter hung heavy in the air, harsh words exchanged, promises broken, hearts shattered. Xavier had asked her to stay, she had chosen to leave. "Because some things are worth fighting for," she answered simply. "Because I made a mistake when I left." Xavier took a step back, wariness clouding his features. "You can't just ride in here after 5 years and expect everything to be the same, Tessa." "I don't expect anything to be the same," she replied. "I know too much has happened, but I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere." Before Xavier could respond, the barn door burst open, revealing a man in an expensive suit, flanked by 2 others with guns holstered at their sides. The banker, Mr. Hammond, and his hired muscle. "Mr. Zane," Hammond called out, his voice cold and calculating. "I thought I'd come by early to discuss the transition. I wasn't expecting company." His eyes narrowed as he took in Tessa's presence. Xavier straightened his shoulders, instinctively moving to stand between Tessa and the newcomers. "The papers say tomorrow, Hammond." "You have no business here tonight. Just being thorough," Hammond replied with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And who might this lovely lady be?" Tessa Wilkins, she answered before Xavier could speak, stepping forward. Thomas Wilkins's sister. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. Not anymore, I'm afraid, Hammond said, adjusting his gloves. Unless, of course, you have the considerable sum of $5,000 to clear the debt. Tessa felt her heart sink. Her savings wouldn't even cover a tenth of that amount. I thought not, Hammond continued, satisfaction evident in his voice. Well, I'll leave you to your reunion. Enjoy your last night here, Mr. Zane. My men will return at noon tomorrow to escort you off the property. With that, he turned and left, his lackeys following close behind. As the door swung shut, Xavier ran a hand through his hair in frustration. You see, it's hopeless. Nothing's hopeless, Tessa insisted, though uncertainty colored her voice. There must be something we can do. Xavier looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd entered the barn. She'd grown up in the 5 years since he'd seen her last. Gone was the impulsive girl who'd fled Cherry Creek for the promise of city life. In her place stood a woman with determination in her eyes and resolve in the set of her jaw. Why did you really come back, Tessa? He asked quietly. She met his gaze unflinchingly. Because this is home, and because I never stopped thinking about you, not once in 5 years. The confession hung in the air between them, as fragile and powerful as a flame in a storm. Xavier's expression softened, but the shadow of their past still darkened his eyes. We should get you up to the house, he said finally, reaching for the lantern. You're soaked through and the storm's only getting worse. As if to emphasize his point, thunder cracked overhead so close it made the barn walls shudder. What about the ranch? Tessa pressed as they moved toward the door. Xavier paused, his hand on the latch. I don't know, he admitted. But you're right about one thing, you're here now, and that's something. It wasn't much, Tessa thought as they rushed through the rain toward the main house, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, even fragile ones born in moments of desperation, were better than endings. The Wilson Ranch house stood, as Tessa remembered it, 2 stories of sturdy timber and stone, built by her grandfather in the early days of Colorado's settlement. Inside, however, the evidence of the ranch's decline was apparent. Furniture that had once gleamed with polish now wore a fine layer of dust. Rooms that had been filled with ranch hands during mealtime sat empty and silent. Your brother took most of his personal belongings when he left, Xavier explained as he lit the lamps in the kitchen. Said there wasn't much point in lugging furniture to California. Tessa removed her wet shawl, hanging it by the stove to dry. Thomas always was practical to a fault, she said with a sad smile. Did he say where exactly in California he was heading? Xavier shook his head. Just said there were opportunities in mining towns. He promised to write once he settled somewhere. An awkward silence fell between them as the reality of their situation sank in. The kitchen, once the heart of the ranch, felt cavernous with just the 2 of them. Are you hungry? Xavier asked finally. There's not much, but I can make something. I can cook, Tessa offered, already moving toward the pantry. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Xavier didn't argue, which told her more about his state than words could have. The Xavier she remembered would have insisted on being the host, on taking care of everything himself. As Tessa rummaged through the meager supplies, she began to form a plan. What about the cattle that are left and the horses? Hammond's claiming them as part of the debt, Xavier said, slumping into a chair at the kitchen table. I've got about 20 head of cattle left after the sickness and 6 horses, including yours and mine. Tessa pulled out flour and lard for biscuits. And if we moved them, tonight? Xavier's head snapped up. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we don't make it easy for Hammond, she replied, measuring flour into a bowl. We take what's rightfully ours and figure out the rest tomorrow. That's theft, Tessa. Is it theft to take what was never rightfully his? My father paid for those animals. Thomas worked this land. You've poured your sweat and blood into this ranch for years. What has Hammond done except sit in his fancy office and wait for people to fail? Xavier stared at her, a spark of the old fire returning to his eyes. Even if we did move them, where would we go? Where would we keep them? Old man Carson's place, Tessa said without hesitation. It's been abandoned since he passed last year, but the corrals are still sturdy. It's far enough away that Hammond won't think to look there right away. And then what? We can't hide forever. Tessa paused in her cooking. No, but we can buy ourselves time. Time to think, to plan, maybe to find another solution. Xavier was silent for a long moment, considering her words. Finally, he stood up, determination straightening his shoulders. We'd need to leave as soon as the storm passes. Move under cover of darkness. A smile spread across Tessa's face. There's the Xavier Zane I remember. He almost smiled back, but then his expression grew serious again. This is dangerous, Tessa. If Hammond catches us, then we'll face that if it happens, she interrupted. But I'm not giving up without a fight, and neither should you. As they ate the simple meal of biscuits and beans, they formed their plan. Xavier would prepare the horses and gather what supplies they could carry. Tessa would pack essential items from the house, things that held sentimental value and couldn't be replaced. By midnight, the storm had passed, leaving a sky full of stars and a moon bright enough to illuminate their path. They worked in near silence, communicating with gestures and whispers, acutely aware that Hammond might have left men watching the property. Tessa found herself moving through the house, touching familiar objects one last time: her mother's rocking chair by the fireplace, the quilt her grandmother had made that still draped over the parlor sofa. These things would have to stay behind, but she tucked a few small treasures into her bag. Her mother's cameo brooch, her father's pocket watch, a small painted portrait of her family when she and Thomas were children. In her old bedroom, untouched since she'd left 5 years ago, Tessa changed into riding clothes, an old pair of trousers that had belonged to Thomas, and a sturdy shirt. Practical clothes for what lay ahead. As she braided her hair, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the determined woman who stared back. When she returned to the kitchen, Xavier was waiting, 2 saddlebags packed and ready. "The horses are saddled," he said. "I've got Rusty and Daisy ready to help herd the cattle. It won't be easy with just the 2 of us, but it's doable if we take it slow." "I've ridden with cattle drives before," Tessa reminded him. "I may have been living in Denver, but I haven't forgotten everything about ranch life." Xavier nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "We need to be back before dawn. Are you ready?" She squared her shoulders. "Ready." They slipped out the back door and made their way to the smaller corral where Xavier had gathered the 6 horses. 2 were already saddled: Xavier's stallion, Midnight, a powerful black beast that had been his pride and joy for years, and a steady mare named Willow that had belonged to Thomas but would serve Tessa well. The cattle were more challenging. Moving 20 head with just 2 riders would be difficult under the best circumstances, but they had to do it quietly and in darkness. Still, both Xavier and Tessa were skilled with livestock, and the cattle, thankfully, were familiar with them. As they guided the small herd away from the ranch, Tessa cast one last look over her shoulder at the house silhouetted against the night sky. Whatever happened next, she knew they couldn't go back. They were committing to a path that would change everything. They moved slowly through the night, keeping to the shadow of the trees when possible, avoiding the main roads. The Carson property lay about 5 miles east, across a stretch of open prairie that made Tessa nervous. They would be completely exposed if anyone happened to be watching. "We'll cross at the narrowest point," Xavier explained as they approached the open land. "Keep them tight and moving steady. If anything spooks them and they scatter, we'll never round them up in time." Tessa nodded, positioning herself at the rear of the herd while Xavier took the lead. With soft clicks and gentle guidance, they urged the cattle forward into the moonlight. The crossing seemed to take an eternity. Every shadow made Tessa's heart race. Every distant sound caused her to scan the horizon for signs of pursuit. But finally, mercifully, they reached the tree line on the other side and continued toward the abandoned Carson homestead. The property came into view just as the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky. The house was small and weathered, but the barn and corrals were solid, just as Tessa had remembered. They guided the cattle into the largest corral, then turned the extra horses into a smaller one, keeping only Midnight and Willow saddled. "We did it," Tessa said, breathless with exertion and relief as they secured the gate. Xavier nodded, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool night air. "For now, but this is just the beginning of our troubles." At least we still have the livestock, she pointed out. That's something Hammond can't take from us. He'll try, Xavier warned. When he realizes they're gone, he'll come looking. Then we need to make sure we're not here when he does, Tessa said. We should check the house, see if there's anything useful, then move on. The Carson house was dusty but otherwise intact. The old man had died in town, so the place hadn't been left to decay around his body. There were basic supplies, some preserved foods, cooking utensils, a few blankets that, while musty, could be aired out and used. We can rest here for a few hours, Xavier decided. But we shouldn't stay long. This will be one of the first places Hammond looks once he discovers the cattle are gone. Tessa agreed, though exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. They took turns keeping watch while the others slept, both too tense for deep rest. By mid-morning, they were back on their horses, the cattle secured in the corral with enough feed to last a day or two. Where to now? Tessa asked as they rode away from the Carson place, keeping to the tree line to avoid being spotted from the main road. I have a friend, Xavier said after a moment of consideration. Samuel Blackstone. He has a small spread about 20 miles north of here. He owes me a favor, and he's no friend of Hammond's. He might be willing to help us, at least temporarily. Tessa nodded, relief washing over her at having a destination, a next step in their uncertain journey. Lead the way. They rode north, keeping off the main trails and stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. Xavier was quieter than Tessa remembered, the weight of their situation evident in the tight set of his shoulders and the furrow between his brows. You blame me, don't you? She asked finally as they paused by a stream to water the horses. Xavier looked up sharply. For what? For leaving? For not being here when things started going wrong? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. No, Tessa, I don't blame you. The drought, the cattle's sickness, those would have happened whether you were here or not. But maybe if I had stayed, if I had been here to help Thomas and you wanted something different for your life, Xavier interrupted. You had dreams beyond Cherry Creek. I understood that then, and I understand it now. Tessa studied his face, trying to reconcile the man before her with the one she had left behind. Did you? Understand, I mean, because when I told you I was leaving, you were so angry. I was angry because I loved you, he said quietly. And because I knew that once you left, you wouldn't come back. Not for me anyway. The confession hung in the air between them, as raw and honest as an open wound. Tessa felt her throat tighten with emotion. I did come back, she whispered. Xavier met her gaze, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pain and something softer, something vulnerable. Yes, you did. Before either could say more, the sound of approaching horses made them both tense. Xavier motioned for Tessa to remain silent as he crept up the bank of the stream to peer through the underbrush. 2 riders, he reported in a hushed voice, coming from the direction of Cherry Creek. Hammond's men, Tessa asked, her heart pounding. Can't tell yet. But we shouldn't take chances. They mounted quickly, leading their horses deeper into the cover of the trees, away from the stream and the approaching riders. For nearly an hour they moved cautiously through the woodland, alert for any sign of pursuit. When they finally emerged on the other side of the small forest, they found themselves overlooking a vast expanse of rolling prairie. In the distance, barely visible on the horizon, was what appeared to be a small homestead, a house, a barn, and the glint of sunlight on what might have been a windmill. Blackstone's place. Tessa asked hopefully. Xavier shook his head. No, his land is still further north. I'm not sure whose property that is. They decided to skirt around it, keeping their distance until they could be sure it wasn't connected to Hammond or anyone else who might turn them in. The detour added hours to their journey, and the sun was beginning to set by the time they spotted the Blackstone ranch in the distance. We should approach carefully, Xavier said. Sam's a good man, but he's cautious by nature, and after what we've done, we need to be careful too. They left the horses hidden in a small grove of trees and approached on foot, staying low and moving quietly. The ranch seemed peaceful, smoke rising from the chimney, a few chickens pecking in the yard, a dog sleeping on the porch. Xavier straightened and was about to step into the open when the dog's head suddenly lifted, its ears perking up. A moment later, the front door opened and a man emerged, rifle in hand. Whoever's out there, show yourself, the man called. I've got a clear shot at where you're hiding." Xavier slowly stood, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "It's me, Sam, Xavier Zane." The man lowered his rifle slightly. "Xavier, what the hell are you doing sneaking around my property?" "It's a long story," Xavier called back. "I've got Tessa Wilkins with me. We need your help." Samuel Blackstone was a sturdy man in his 40s, with a weathered face and kind eyes that belied his gruff exterior. Once he recognized Xavier, his demeanor changed completely. He welcomed them into his home, where his wife Martha quickly set about preparing a meal for the weary travelers. Over bowls of hearty stew and fresh bread, Xavier and Tessa explained their situation: the loss of the ranch, Hammond's ruthlessness, and their desperate plan to save what little they could. "Hammond's had his eye on that land for years," Samuel said, shaking his head. "Valuable water rights. He's been squeezing ranchers all over the territory, calling in loans at the first sign of trouble. He's not the only banker in Colorado," Martha added, refilling Tessa's coffee cup, "but he's certainly the most ruthless. We need somewhere safe to keep the cattle for now," Xavier explained. "Just until we can figure out a more permanent solution." Samuel exchanged a look with his wife, some unspoken communication passing between them. "You can bring them here," he said finally. "I've got room in my south pasture, and it's well hidden from the main road." Relief washed over Tessa. "We can pay you," she offered. "I have some savings, and once we sell some of the cattle," Samuel waved off her offer. "Xavier saved my life during that blizzard 3 winters back. I wouldn't be sitting here if not for him. Consider us even." After dinner, while Martha showed Tessa to a spare room where she could clean up and rest, Samuel and Xavier sat on the porch, smoking and talking in low voices. "Hammond won't give up easily," Samuel warned. "He's got the law in his pocket, and he's not above hiring guns when the law won't do what he wants." Xavier nodded, exhaling a stream of smoke. "I know, but what choice did we have? Let him take everything?" "No, I understand why you did it. I'm just saying you need to be prepared for what comes next." Samuel tapped his pipe against the porch railing. "You've got feelings for her, don't you? The Wilkins girl." Xavier's silence was answer enough. "Complicated business, mixing love and survival," Samuel observed. "But if anyone can make it work, it's you, Xavier." The next morning, they rode back to the Carson property to retrieve the cattle. To their relief, the animals were still there, undisturbed. It took most of the day to drive them to the Blackstone Ranch, but by sunset, the small herd was safely enclosed in the south pasture, hidden from view of anyone passing by on the main road. For the next week, Xavier and Tessa settled into a routine at the Blackstone Ranch. They helped with chores to earn their keep, worked with the cattle, and began to formulate a plan for the future. Samuel rode into town regularly, bringing back news and supplies, and keeping an ear out for any mention of Hammond or the missing livestock. "Hammond's got men searching all over the territory," Samuel reported one evening. "Offering a reward for information about the cattle or your whereabouts. He's claiming theft of bank property." "We need to get out of the territory," Xavier said, pacing the Blackstone kitchen. "Take the cattle and head north, maybe to Wyoming or Montana." "That's a dangerous journey," Martha cautioned, "especially with just the two of you." Tessa had been quiet during these discussions, lost in thought. Finally, she spoke up. "What if we didn't run? What if we fought back instead?" All eyes turned to her in surprise. "Hammond's not invincible," she continued. "He's a businessman, and like any businessman, he has weaknesses. We just need to find them." "What do you have in mind?" Xavier asked, intrigued despite his skepticism. "I spent 5 years in Denver," Tessa explained. "I made friends, connections. One of them works for the territorial governor's office. Another is a journalist for the Denver Post. What if we exposed Hammond's practices? Brought attention to how he's been squeezing ranchers and taking their land?" Samuel stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's risky. Hammond has a lot of influence. But he's not above the law," Tessa insisted. "And if enough people stand up to him if his reputation is damaged, it could work," Xavier said slowly, "but we'd need evidence. Documentation of his practices, testimonies from other ranchers he's ruined." "I can help with that," Samuel offered. "I know at least 3 families who lost their land to Hammond in the past year alone." A plan began to form. Tessa would write to her contacts in Denver, setting the groundwork. Samuel would reach out to other ranchers who had suffered under Hammond's predatory practices. Xavier would compile whatever documentation they could find about the Wilson Ranch loan and how Hammond had manipulated the terms. It was a long shot, but it gave them purpose, a direction to move in besides simply running away. And as the days passed, something else began to grow alongside their determination, the rekindling of feelings between Xavier and Tessa. They found moments together away from the work and planning, early mornings checking the cattle, evenings walking the perimeter of the Blackstone property under star-filled skies. They talked about the 5 years they'd spent apart, filling in the gaps of their separate lives. "I thought about writing to you," Tessa admitted one evening as they sat on a hilltop overlooking the pasture. "So many times." "Why didn't you?" Xavier asked, his voice free of accusation, merely curious. "Pride at first," she answered honestly. "Then fear. Fear that you had moved on, that you hated me for leaving, that you might not answer." "I would have answered," he said quietly. Tessa turned to look at him, the moonlight silvering his features. "And what would you have said? That I missed you? That the ranch wasn't the same without you? That I understood why you left, even if it broke my heart?" Tessa's breath caught in her throat. "And now, after everything that's happened," Xavier reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Now I'd say that maybe losing everything wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, because it brought you back." Their kiss was gentle, tentative, like explorers mapping unfamiliar territory that was somehow still recognizable. When they finally pulled apart, Tessa rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed, savoring the moment. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we face it together this time." 2 weeks after arriving at the Blackstone Ranch, their plan was set in motion. Tessa's letter had reached her friend at the governor's office, who expressed interest in investigating Hammond's banking practices. Her journalist contact was equally intrigued, especially after hearing that several other ranchers were willing to come forward with similar stories. Samuel had gathered testimonies from 4 families, all with similar experiences: loans with hidden terms, sudden calls for repayment during times of hardship, and the suspicious appearance of Hammond himself to purchase the foreclosed properties at a fraction of their worth. "It's starting to look like a pattern of deliberate fraud," Xavier said as they reviewed the documents spread across the Blackstone dining table. "Hammond's been targeting ranches specifically for their water rights and strategic locations. The question is, can we prove it?" Martha asked, ever practical. "We need access to the bank records," Tessa said, "something that shows Hammond knew exactly what he was doing." "That's impossible," Samuel objected. "We can't just walk into the bank and ask for their confidential records." A thoughtful expression crossed Tessa's face. "Maybe we can't, but I know someone who might be able to help us." The next day, Tessa rode into the nearest town with Martha, disguised in one of the older woman's dresses and a bonnet that concealed most of her face. Their destination was the telegraph office, where Tessa sent a message to a name that made Xavier raise his eyebrows when she told him later Eliza Hammond, the banker's daughter. "You know Hammond's daughter?" he asked, incredulous. "We taught at the same school in Denver," Tessa explained. "She's nothing like her father, kind, honest, and deeply uncomfortable with his business practices. She left Denver last year to work at a school in Boston, partly to distance herself from him. And you think she'll help us? I think she'll want the truth to come out as much as we do." The reply came 2 days later. "Arriving Cherry Creek Thursday stop will help however I can stop. Stay safe, dear friend, stop Eliza." The arrival of Eliza Hammond changed everything. She came not only with a willingness to help, but with something far more valuable: knowledge of her father's private business practices, and access to copies of documents she had taken before leaving Denver, suspecting that someday they might be needed. "He's been doing this for years," she explained as they gathered in the Blackstone parlor. Eliza was a slender woman with intelligent eyes and a quiet determination that reminded Tessa why they had become friends. Targeting specific properties, manipulating loan terms, even causing problems for ranchers to ensure they couldn't make payments. "What kind of problems?" Xavier asked sharply. Eliza looked uncomfortable. I can't prove anything, but there were cattle that mysteriously fell ill only on certain properties, water sources that were suddenly contaminated, fences that were cut, allowing livestock to wander or be stolen. Xavier's face darkened with anger. The cattle sickness at the Wilson Ranch, you think Hammond had something to do with that? It's possible, Eliza admitted. I overheard him talking to a man once about helping nature along at the Wilson place. I didn't understand what it meant at the time, but now. The revelation that Hammond might have deliberately poisoned their cattle filled Xavier with a cold fury. It was one thing to call in alone. It was another entirely to sabotage a ranch to ensure its failure. With Eliza's evidence added to what they had already collected, they now had a compelling case against Hammond. The question was how best to use it. If we take this to the territorial authorities, Hammond will use his influence to bury it, Samuel warned. We need to make it public, create enough of a scandal that it can't be ignored. My contact at the Denver Post, Tessa suggested. If we give him the full story with all the evidence, he could publish it. And I can write to the governor directly, Eliza added. He's always been suspicious of my father, but never had cause to act. They formed their plan carefully, aware that they would only get one chance to expose Hammond. The evidence would be sent to multiple sources simultaneously: the newspaper, the governor's office, and even the federal marshal who oversaw the territory. They would create such a storm of public and official scrutiny that Hammond wouldn't be able to escape the consequences. But before they could implement their plan, disaster struck. One of Hammond's search parties, still looking for the missing cattle, happened upon the south pasture of the Blackstone Ranch. Within hours, Hammond himself arrived with the local sheriff and 6 armed men. They're coming up the main road, Samuel announced, rushing into the house after spotting the approaching riders from his lookout point. At least 8 men, including Hammond and Sheriff Jenkins. How did they find us? Martha asked, already moving to hide the incriminating documents. Doesn't matter now, Xavier said grimly. Tessa, Eliza, take the evidence and go out the back. Head for the line shack in the North Woods. Sam and I will handle Hammond. I'm not leaving you, Tessa protested, but Xavier cut her off. The evidence is what matters. If Hammond gets his hands on it, everything we've worked for is lost. Please, Tessa. The urgency in his voice convinced her. Quickly gathering the documents, Tessa and Eliza slipped out the back door and hurried toward the barn, where 2 horses were already saddled. As they rode away, Tessa looked back one last time to see Xavier, Samuel, and Martha standing together on the porch, facing the approaching riders with determined expressions. The line shack was a small, crude structure used by the Blackstones during the winter months when checking on distant parts of their property. It was well hidden in a dense stand of pine trees, about 5 miles from the main ranch house. As Tessa and Eliza settled in to wait, their conversation turned to the men they had left behind. Xavier loves you very much, Eliza observed quietly as they sorted through the documents, organizing them for quick reference if needed. Tessa looked up in surprise. Did he tell you that? He didn't need to. It's in the way he looks at you, the way he speaks your name. Eliza smiled sadly. I had someone look at me that way once. I know what it means. What happened? Tessa asked gently. My father happened. He didn't approve of a schoolteacher with no fortune or prospects. He made sure the young man knew he wasn't welcome in our home. Eliza's hands stilled on the papers before her. That's part of why I'm doing this. My father has controlled and ruined too many lives, including mine. Tessa reached across the small table to squeeze Eliza's hand. After this is over, you'll be free of his shadow. We all will. Hours passed with no word from the ranch. As night fell, Tessa's worry grew until she could no longer sit still. Something's wrong, she said, pacing the small confines of the shack. They should have sent word by now. It's too dangerous to go back, Eliza cautioned. If Hammond's men are still there, I have to know, Tessa insisted, already reaching for her coat. You stay here with the documents. If I'm not back by dawn, take them and ride for Denver. Go straight to your contact at the governor's office. Despite Eliza's protests, Tessa slipped out into the darkness. The night was clear and cold, the moon providing just enough light to follow the trail back toward the ranch. She moved cautiously, alert for any sign of Hammond's men, but the forest was quiet save for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of small animals in the underbrush. As she approached the edge of the woods overlooking the Blackstone property, Tessa dropped to a crouch, scanning the area. The house was dark, no lamps burning in the windows. No horses were visible in the corral. The entire place had an abandoned feel that sent a chill down her spine. Moving carefully from shadow to shadow, Tessa made her way to the barn first, finding it empty of both animals and people. The main house was similarly deserted, but showed signs of a struggle: an overturned chair in the kitchen, a broken lamp in the parlor, papers scattered across the floor. Fear clutched at Tessa's heart as she searched for any clue about what had happened. In Xavier's room, she found his saddlebags missing and the drawer where he kept his revolver empty. In the Blackstones' bedroom, several items of clothing were gone, suggesting they had packed in haste. Back in the kitchen, Tessa finally found what she was looking for: a note tucked behind the coffee pot, a location only she would think to check, an old hiding place they had used as children for secret messages. Hammond taking us to Cherry Creek for questioning. Cattle seized as evidence. Don't come to town. Complete the plan. I love you. Tessa pressed the note to her chest, relief and fear warring within her. They were alive, but in Hammond's custody. And with the cattle seized, their leverage was gone. Everything now depended on exposing Hammond's crimes before he could further harm Xavier and the Blackstones. Returning to the line shack, Tessa shared the news with Eliza. We need to move faster than we planned, she concluded. Hammond will try to force a confession, make them admit to stealing the cattle. The sheriff wouldn't allow, Eliza began, then stopped, remembering that the local law enforcement was firmly in her father's pocket. What do you suggest? Tessa thought for a moment. We ride for Denver tonight. Your contact at the governor's office, can they send a federal marshal to Cherry Creek immediately? If I explain the urgency, yes. The governor has been looking for an excuse to investigate my father for some time. Then that's what we do, Tessa said, already gathering their belongings. We ride straight through, no stops except to rest the horses when absolutely necessary. The journey to Denver was grueling: nearly 70 miles of rough terrain, with the constant fear of pursuit driving them to push harder than was wise. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, both women were exhausted, their horses nearly spent. They went directly to the governor's office, where Eliza's contact, a serious-looking man named Howard Fletcher, listened to their story with growing concern. These are serious allegations, he said, examining the documents they had brought. Fraud, extortion, possibly even attempted murder if he deliberately poisoned livestock. And now he's holding 3 innocent people in Cherry Creek on false charges, Tessa added urgently. Please, Mr. Fletcher, we need your help, Fletcher nodded, already reaching for pen and paper. I'll send a telegram to Marshal Collins immediately. He's in Colorado Springs and can reach Cherry Creek by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you ladies find somewhere safe to stay. Hammond still has friends in Denver. With Fletcher's assistance, they secured rooms at a small boarding house under false names. While Eliza remained to coordinate with the newspaper contact, preparing the story for publication, Tessa made a decision that she knew Xavier wouldn't approve if she was going back to Cherry Creek. It's too dangerous, Eliza protested when Tessa informed her of her plan. The marshal will be there tomorrow. Let him handle it. Tomorrow might be too late, Tessa argued. I can get there tonight if I leave now and ride hard. I need to make sure Xavier and the Blackstones are safe. Seeing the determination in her friend's eyes, Eliza didn't try to dissuade her further. Instead, she pressed a small derringer into Tessa's hand. Take this, at least, and promise you'll be careful. Tessa tucked the small pistol into her pocket. I promise, and Eliza, thank you for everything. The ride back to Cherry Creek was even more punishing than the journey to Denver had been. Tessa pushed her tired horse as hard as she dared, stopping only once at a small creek to let the animal drink and rest briefly. Night had fallen by the time she reached the outskirts of town, which suited her purposes. Darkness would provide some cover for what she planned to do. Cherry Creek was a small settlement, with just one main street lined with the essential businesses: general store, saloon, blacksmith, and of course, Hammond's bank. The sheriff's office was at the far end of the street, a small building with 2 cells in the back. If Xavier and the Blackstones were being held in town, that's where they would be. Leaving her horse tied in a stand of trees outside town, Tessa approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. The town was quiet, most businesses closed for the night, though light and noise spilled from the saloon. As she neared the sheriff's office, she saw a lamp burning inside and 2 horses tied to the hitching post out front. Circling around to the back of the building, Tessa peered through the small barred window of the first cell. Empty. But in the second cell, she could make out 3 figures: Xavier and the Blackstones, sitting on the single cot, their expressions grim in the dim light. Tessa tapped softly on the window. Xavier's head snapped up, his eyes widening when he saw her. He moved quickly to the window. "What are you doing here?" he whispered urgently. "It's not safe." "The marshal is coming," she told him quietly. "He'll be here tomorrow afternoon. Is Hammond still in town?" "Yes, at the hotel. He's bringing in a judge tomorrow morning, one of his cronies from Denver. He's planning a quick trial and conviction before anyone can interfere." Tessa's mind raced. "We need to stall them, keep you out of that courtroom until the marshal arrives." "The sheriff's at the saloon now," Xavier said, "but he'll be back soon to check on us. You need to go, Tessa." "I'm not leaving you," she insisted. "Not again." The sound of footsteps and voices approaching from the front of the building made them both freeze. Tessa quickly ducked out of sight as the back door of the sheriff's office opened and light spilled out into the yard. "Check on them again before you turn in," Hammond's voice ordered. "I don't trust Zane not to try something." "They're secure, Mr. Hammond," the sheriff replied. "Ain't nobody breaking out of my jail. See that they don't. The judge will be here at 9 sharp. I want this matter settled quickly." The door closed and the voices moved back inside. Tessa remained hidden, her mind working furiously. She needed a way to delay the trial, to keep Xavier and the Blackstones out of that courtroom until the marshal arrived. An idea began to form: dangerous, possibly foolish, but potentially effective. If she couldn't stop the trial from happening, perhaps she could ensure it didn't proceed as Hammond planned. Waiting until the sheriff had made his final check, and the lights in the office dimmed as he retired to his quarters in the back room, Tessa made her way to the telegraph office. It was closed for the night, but the operator lived above the office, and Tessa knew him: old Mr. Peterson, who had been running the telegraph since before she was born. A few pebbles tossed at his window brought the elderly man to the door, surprised but not displeased to see Thomas Wilkins's sister return to town. "Need to send an urgent telegram, Mr. Peterson," she explained quietly. "It's important." The old man nodded, leading her inside and lighting a small lamp at his desk. "Who to, Miss Tessa?" "Judge William Bradford in Denver," she said. "He's an old friend of my father's." Peterson raised an eyebrow but asked no questions as he prepared to transmit the message. Tessa dictated carefully. "Urgent stop, request your presence, Cherry Creek tomorrow morning. Stop Hammond Bank fraud case. Stop federal interest. Stop governor aware. Stop your expertise needed. Stop with gratitude. Tessa Wilkins. Stop, it was a gamble." Judge Bradford might not remember her or care about a case in a small town like Cherry Creek. But he had been her father's friend, and more importantly, he was known for his strict adherence to the law and his dislike of bankers who abused their power. If he received the telegram in time, if he chose to respond. "Sent," Peterson confirmed after tapping out the message. "Though I doubt the judge will be checking telegrams at this hour, Miss Tessa." "I know, but first thing tomorrow, perhaps." She handed him payment for the telegram, adding a generous tip. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson, and if anyone asks, ain't seen you since you left for Denver years ago," the old man finished with a wink. "You take care now, Miss Tessa. Whatever trouble you're in, I hope it works out." Tessa spent the night in the stables behind the old Wilson ranch house, now empty and dark. Hammond hadn't wasted any time moving in, it seemed. The irony of hiding in the very barn where she had found Xavier just weeks ago wasn't lost on her. She curled up in the hayloft, exhaustion finally claiming her for a few hours of restless sleep. Morning came too quickly. Tessa woke to the sounds of the town stirring to life. From her vantage point in the loft, she could see people moving along the main street, including Hammond himself, striding purposefully toward the small building that served as both courthouse and town hall when needed. There was no sign of a second judge arriving, no indication that her telegram had had any effect. With a heavy heart, Tessa realized she would have to proceed with the second part of her desperate plan. She made her way back into town, keeping her head down and a shawl pulled over her distinctive auburn hair. The courthouse was beginning to fill with curious townspeople. A trial was rare entertainment in Cherry Creek, especially one involving the prominent banker and the former foreman of the Wilson Ranch. Slipping in through the back, Tessa found a seat in the last row, just as the side door opened and the sheriff led in the prisoners. Xavier looked tired but unbowed, his eyes scanning the room until they found Tessa. A brief flash of alarm crossed his face, but he quickly masked it, giving her a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Hammond sat at the prosecutor's table, smug confidence radiating from him as he arranged his papers. Beside him sat a thin man in an expensive suit, the judge from Denver, presumably, though Tessa didn't recognize him. Just as the proceedings were about to begin, the main doors of the courthouse burst open. A tall, distinguished man in his 60s strode in, his black judge's robes billowing behind him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. The thin man at Hammond's table rose, confusion evident on his face. "Who are you, sir?" "Judge William Bradford, Federal Circuit Court," the newcomer announced, his stern gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Hammond. "And I understand there's a matter of bank fraud and false imprisonment that requires immediate attention." Tessa could have wept with relief. Her telegram had worked. Judge Bradford had come. Hammond jumped to his feet, his face flushing with anger. "This is a local matter, Bradford," he sputtered. "You have no jurisdiction here." "On the contrary," Bradford replied coolly, approaching the bench. "When allegations of fraud involving a federally chartered bank arise, it becomes very much my jurisdiction." He turned to the thin man. "Judge Reynolds, isn't it, from Denver? I suggest you vacate that seat immediately, unless you wish your rather questionable relationship with Mr. Hammond to become the subject of a separate investigation." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Reynolds gathered his papers and quickly retreated from the bench. Bradford took his place, his authoritative presence immediately commanding respect. "Sheriff," Bradford called, "remove the restraints from these prisoners immediately. They will remain in custody but shall be treated with dignity until this matter is properly investigated." As the sheriff reluctantly complied, the courthouse doors opened again. This time, a man wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge entered, flanked by two deputies. Behind them came Eliza Hammond, clutching a thick sheaf of papers. "Marshal Collins," Bradford acknowledged. "I see the governor acted promptly on the information he received." "Yes, Your Honor," the marshal replied. "I have warrants for the arrest of Jeremiah Hammond on charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit property damage." Hammond's face drained of color as he stared at his daughter. "Eliza, what have you done?" "What you taught me to do, Father," she replied steadily. "Protect my interests. Except my interests include justice and the well-being of innocent people." What followed was not the quick trial Hammond had planned, but rather a detailed examination of the evidence against him. Judge Bradford insisted on hearing testimony from Xavier and the Blackstones about the circumstances surrounding the loss of the Wilson Ranch. Eliza presented the documents she had gathered, including ledgers showing Hammond's systematic targeting of properties with valuable water rights. By mid-afternoon, the picture was clear. Hammond had engaged in a pattern of predatory lending, followed by deliberate sabotage when ranchers refused to sell to him voluntarily. The Wilson Ranch had been just one of many victims in his scheme to control the water rights throughout the territory. "In light of the evidence presented," Judge Bradford announced, "I am remanding Jeremiah Hammond to federal custody to await trial on multiple charges of fraud and conspiracy." Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate stay on all property transfers executed by Hammond Bank in the past 3 years, pending full review." He turned to Xavier, Tessa, and the Blackstones. "As for the matter of the cattle removed from the Wilson property, it appears they were rightfully owned by Mr. Zane and Mr. Wilkins, not bank property as claimed. They shall be returned immediately, along with any other property seized." The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Several other ranchers who had lost land to Hammond stood up, shouting questions about whether they too might recover their properties. Bradford raised his hand for silence. "Justice will be served for all affected parties," he assured them, "but it will take time and proper legal process. For now, Mr. Hammond will be held accountable for his actions, and his victims will begin to receive restitution." As Hammond was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief, Xavier made his way through the crowd to Tessa's side. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "You impossible, stubborn, brave woman," he murmured against her hair. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she replied, her voice muffled against his shirt, "but we're both still here." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "You came back," he said softly, wonder in his voice. "Not just to Cherry Creek, but to the ranch, to me, even when there was nothing left." "There was you," Tessa said simply. "You were always enough." Their kiss, there in the middle of the crowded courthouse, was witnessed by half the town. Neither of them cared. After 5 years apart and weeks of uncertainty and danger, they had found their way back to each other. In the days that followed, Cherry Creek buzzed with the news of Hammond's downfall and the revelations about his business practices. More ranchers came forward with similar stories, and Judge Bradford established a special commission to review all of Hammond's property dealings. For Xavier and Tessa, the victory was deeply personal. The Wilson Ranch was returned to them, the deed now bearing both their names. The cattle they had fought so hard to save came home to familiar pastures. And in the barn where Tessa had found Xavier on his knees just weeks before, they now stood together, planning the restoration of the ranch and their future. "It needs work," Xavier admitted as they surveyed the property. Neglect had taken its toll during Hammond's brief ownership. Fences needed mending, the house required repairs, and the fields were overgrown. "It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Tessa replied, slipping her hand into his, "but we're not alone. We have friends, neighbors who are eager to help now that Hammond's gone." She was right. The Blackstones had already offered to lend them hands for the rebuilding. Other ranchers, grateful for their role in exposing Hammond, volunteered assistance. Even Eliza, who had decided to remain in Colorado rather than return to Boston, offered financial backing from her share of her father's legitimate assets. One evening, as the summer sun set over the newly repaired fence line of the north pasture, Xavier led Tessa to a spot overlooking the entire ranch. From this vantage point, they could see the house with its fresh paint, the barn with its new roof, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "Do you remember the last time we were here?" he asked quietly. Tessa nodded. It had been the night before she left for Denver 5 years ago. They had argued bitterly, their dreams pulling them in opposite directions, hers toward education and city life, his tied to the land and the ranch. "I was wrong that night," Xavier continued, turning to face her. "I told you that you had to choose the ranch or your dreams. I didn't understand then that dreams can change, that people can grow together instead of apart." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a simple gold ring with a single pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it with me every day since you left, a reminder of what I lost by not being willing to compromise, to find a middle path." Xavier dropped to one knee, the gesture echoing that fateful day in the barn, but this time with hope rather than despair in his eyes. "Tessa Wilkins, I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. I'm asking if I can be part of them. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Tessa's eyes as she looked down at the man she had loved for so long, the man she had found broken but who had shown such strength and determination in rebuilding his life, their life. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Yes, Xavier." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Tessa pulled him to his feet and into her arms. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to a promise that had been 5 years and many hardships in the making. The wedding took place that autumn, when the aspen trees turned gold and the first cool breezes hinted at the winter to come. It was a simple ceremony held on the ranch, with Judge Bradford officiating and the Blackstones standing as witnesses. Eliza Hammond, now going by her mother's maiden name of Parker, played the piano that Xavier had surprised Tessa with as a wedding gift. To replace the one you had to leave behind in Denver, he had explained when the wagon delivered it to the ranch house. They exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers and wheat, the same spot where Tessa's parents had married 25 years earlier. Xavier, in a new suit that Samuel had insisted on buying for him, looked at Tessa as if she were the only person in the world as she walked toward him in a dress of cream-colored silk that Martha and Eliza had helped her make. "I take you, Tessa Wilkins, to be my wife," Xavier said, his voice clear and strong. "To share in your dreams as you share in mine, to build our future together on this land that has seen both our sorrows and our joys. I promise to remember always that what matters is not what we have, but that we have each other." Tessa's vows, spoken through happy tears, echoed his sentiment. "I take you, Xavier Zane, to be my husband. I promise to stand by you through whatever challenges we face, to remember the lesson we've learned that nothing is truly lost as long as we have each other. This ranch is not just land and buildings, it's our home, our future, and I pledge to build that future with you, day by day." As Judge Bradford pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer went up from the small gathering of friends and neighbors. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the county. Later, as they stood on the porch of their home, watching the last guests depart, Xavier slipped his arm around Tessa's waist. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Do you remember what you said that day in the barn? That you'd lost everything. And you said not me," Xavier recalled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You were right. As long as we have each other, we have everything that matters." In the years that followed, the Wilson Zane Ranch prospered. Xavier's skill with cattle and Tessa's head for business proved to be a powerful combination. They expanded their holdings, buying some of the adjacent land that had also fallen victim to Hammond's schemes and restoring it to productivity. Tessa didn't abandon her love of teaching, either. She started a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and neighboring ranchers who lived too far from town to attend the regular school. 3 days a week, the converted bunkhouse filled with the sounds of young voices learning to read and cipher under her patient guidance. Their first child, a son they named James after Tessa's father, arrived the following summer. He grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's auburn hair and his father's blue eyes, equally at home with books and horses. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Hope, whose arrival during a spring blizzard tested their courage but ultimately strengthened the bonds of their family. The changes that came to Cherry Creek in the wake of Hammond's downfall were profound. With the predatory banker gone, the town began to thrive. New businesses opened, more families settled in the area, and a sense of community flourished that had been missing during Hammond's reign. Eliza Parker, using her share of her father's legitimate assets, established a small bank that operated on principles of fairness and support for local ranchers and farmers. The Blackstones expanded their ranch and became leaders in the community, with Samuel eventually serving as mayor of Cherry Creek. 10 years after that fateful day, when Tessa found Xavier on his knees in the barn, they stood together on the hilltop overlooking their property. The ranch had grown, now employing a dozen hands year-round. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors. The barns were full, the pastures lush, the orchards they had planted bearing fruit. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tessa asked, her hand resting comfortably in Xavier's. At 33, she had lost none of her spirit or determination, though motherhood and ranch life had added new dimensions to her character. Beside her, Xavier, at 37, had grown into his role as one of the most respected ranchers in the territory, his earlier hardships giving him both wisdom and compassion. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted, watching their children playing with the Blackstone's youngest in the meadow below. "I thought I knew what success looked like: a profitable ranch, respect from other ranchers, but this—" He gestured to encompass not just the property but their family, their life together. "This is beyond anything I could have hoped for, even with all the challenges," Tessa asked with a smile. There had been many over the years: harsh winters, difficult births among the cattle, the fire that had nearly claimed the East Barn 2 summers ago. "Especially with the challenges," Xavier replied, drawing her close. "They've shown us what we're capable of together." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Xavier and Tessa made their way down the hill toward home. Their children ran to meet them, James proudly displaying a bird's feather he had found, Hope chattering about the story Mrs. Blackstone had told her. Xavier lifted his daughter into his arms, her small hands clasping around his neck as she continued her excited narrative. Tessa took James's hand, listening attentively to his discovery as they walked toward the house where lamps were already being lit against the coming evening. Behind them, the barn where their journey together had truly begun stood solid and strong, a testament to what could be rebuilt from the ashes of loss. And ahead of them stretched a future they had created together, built on the foundation of a simple truth that had sustained them through every trial: nothing is truly lost as long as you have each other.